is Jared. This is Not Ashamed of the Gospel. Let's read a passage together. I'm going to read Revelation 3:15. Okay, I'll put it up on the screen. It says, I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. Would you were either cold or hot, so that because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. Or you say, I am rich. I have prospered. I need nothing. Not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. And then verse 19, to those whom I love, I reprove and discipline. So be zealous and repentant. So, probably heard this verse maybe used in a gospel message if you've ever been to a gospel meeting, or maybe just kind of, I don't know, I feel like it's a verse a lot of people use kind of maybe in jest, but I feel like we're really missing something when it comes to this passage. Does this verse mean that God would rather you be like unsaved than just a lukewarm Christian? Both of these are wrong, and I'd love to tell you why. Okay, here's the thing. The Bible's for us. We live in 2019. The church in Laodicea didn't live in 2019. They lived in the ancient Greek world, and they experienced stuff differently. The thing about Revelation is there's specific letters written to specific churches that Jesus is dealing with in Laodicea. We have to recognize that. It is for us, but it also was for Laodicea at that point. There's a warning here from Jesus to the church, and it seems like there's only two options, that he would rather the church be super zealous for the kingdom or just completely turned off and like not even interested. Okay, so here's an example. Do you ever just turn a shower on and the only water that comes out is like lukewarm? It'd be pretty weird, right? Like sometimes you probably never want to have a cold shower, but you want hot water. About 8 kilometers away from Laodicea, there's a city called Hierapolis, and it was up on this big plain, and they had a bunch of springs full of hot water, and these springs would be piped back down to Laodicea down south because they didn't have any hot water nearby. And then to the east of them, the city of Colossae had springs full of cold water. Both of these springs served purposes. The hot water they would use for cooking, for medicinal uses, for bathing. For the cold water, people would use this to drink. Laodicea didn't have either of that. They just had wells full of lukewarm water. Now, the story starts to make a little more sense. Jesus was pleading with these people to be either hot or cold. Laodicea, as the city itself, didn't have hot or cold water available to dispense, right? They had to import it from other cities. Jesus was asking the Laodiceans to be zealous for the kingdom in a way that they would have understood back then, because they understood this water problem that was going on around them. He's not just telling the church to make up their minds whether they believe or not. They've already dealt with this. It's for the Christians. Jesus is calling them to be useful for the kingdom. Just like the water that flowed from other cities at the time, Jesus is calling the Laodiceans and us also to be useful for the kingdom and to serve a purpose for the kingdom. This hot and cold water served a bunch of purposes in Laodicea because they didn't have that on their own. God is calling us to serve the kingdom. He wants us to be hot or cold, not lukewarm. Neither the word hot or cold are bad in Laodicean terms, but we might associate that with being bad because we think of cold Christianity, which isn't Christianity at all. Being cold isn't a bad thing in this passage. Christ just wants useful people in his kingdom. And the people at Laodicea weren't being useful. They were just useless. And Christ gives a warning in this passage. He says, if you're not useful for the kingdom, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. How much use does lukewarm water have for eating, drinking, bathing? Nothing. It's useless. And just like that useless water, Christ is calling the Laodiceans to step out of that and step back into usefulness for the kingdom. God created the universe, and he also created you. And I don't think it's very sufficient to just let him take 50% of us. We need to give our entire lives over to him. If we're useless in the kingdom, Christ is giving us a warning. He's saying he's going to spit us out. But the thing is, if you're saved, there's no such thing as being lukewarm. And if you think that you are acting lukewarm, I encourage you to be useful like the hot or cold water here and step into the zeal for the kingdom that Christ expects from us. It's just kind of a given that you're going to help the kingdom and you're going to serve Christ's purposes in your life if you are truly a Christian. Just like in the warning here, lukewarmness in Laodicea was bad. Christ is giving us a sober warning. Jesus didn't die lukewarmly. He died serving us. He laid down his life for us. And he now calls us to the same thing. We don't live in Laodicea. We don't have a problem with hot or cold water. But let's be useful for the kingdom. Here's the big thing I want to drive down. Christ was both hot and cold in his life. He was the perfect example of being useful for God. He perfectly did God's will. And just like that, Christ wants us to be useful. He wants us to be hot and cold. He doesn't want us to just be thrown out to the wayside as we get caught up in the world. At the same time, being cold isn't a bad thing. It just means you're being useful for what God has given you. So, let's be cold for the kingdom. Let's be like those Laodiceans. Let's flick on the switch, get the zeal pumping again. Let's be like that cold water that satisfies thirst. Let's be like that hot water that we can use to clean ourselves in sanctification, if you want to go there. Give Revelation 3 a read. It's a pretty heady book, but I've started to really enjoy picking out certain things like this. This has been Not Ashamed of the Gospel. I'm Jared. Thank you.